Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the massive viewport of humanity's first true warship in 3 millennia, watching as the barrier began to crack. The quantum field that had imprisoned Earth's solar system shimmered like broken glass against the star-filled darkness. Hairline fractures spreading across its invisible surface with each pulse from the Prometheus array. "Ma'am, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations across all barrier frequencies," reported Commander James Wright from his position at the tactical station. "Whatever the Council used to build this thing, it's not holding up well against our resonance bombardment." Chen allowed herself a thin smile. 3,000 years of forced isolation had taught humanity many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was patience. While the Galactic Council had grown fat and complacent in their sterile peace, humanity had turned their prison into a forge. Every decade of isolation had been another century of focused evolution, technological advancement, and most importantly, preparation for this exact moment. "Time until complete barrier collapse?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for war against enemies that had forgotten how to fight. 18 hours, 14 minutes, came the crisp reply from the navigation officer. "The cascade failure is accelerating beyond our projections." Chen nodded, turning away from the viewport to address the bridge crew. These men and women represented the best of humanity's new military caste, individuals who had been bred, trained, and augmented for a war that most of the galaxy believed would never come. Their eyes held a hunger that would have terrified the soft creatures that ruled the Council worlds. "Signal the fleet," she commanded. "Execute Operation Lazarus. All ships are to proceed to their assigned targets once the barrier falls. Remember, we're not just breaking free from our cage. We're announcing to the entire galaxy that humanity is back, and we're done playing by their rules." The Prometheus was just one ship among thousands that hung in formation around Earth's orbital stations, sleek predator craft that bore no resemblance to the clunky vessels humanity had fielded during the first contact wars. 3 millennia of isolation had forced human shipbuilders to think beyond conventional physics, to push the boundaries of what was possible when survival was the only alternative to extinction. Dr. Elena Vasquez materialized on the bridge via quantum transmission, her holographic form flickering slightly as the barrier interference played havoc with Earth's communication systems. As humanity's chief xenobiologist and the architect of their new understanding of galactic species, her input had shaped every aspect of their return strategy. "Admiral, I've finished analyzing the latest intelligence reports from our deep space probes," she said, her expression grim. "The situation in the galaxy is worse than we anticipated. The Council's rigid caste system has created fractures throughout their civilization. 12 sectors are in open rebellion, and there are reports of something called the Grey Fleet attacking Outer Rim colonies." Chen's expression hardened. The Grey Fleet was a name that had appeared in intercepted transmissions over the past decade, always associated with terror and inexplicable defeats of Council forces. "What do we know about this Grey Fleet?" "Very little concrete data," Vasquez admitted. "But based on the panic in Council communications, it appears to be a force that operates beyond their understanding. Ships that don't show up on conventional sensors, weapons that ignore energy shields, and tactics that seem to defy established military doctrine." This was troubling news, but Chen had expected complications. Humanity's return to the galactic stage was never going to be simple. "Has there been any attempt by the Council to contact us? Any indication they're aware of our pending escape?" "None whatsoever," Wright reported from his station. "Their arrogance remains absolute. The last transmission we intercepted from this sector was a routine patrol report noting that the quarantine zone remains stable and requires no further monitoring." Chen almost laughed. The Galactic Council had made the same mistake that had doomed countless civilizations throughout human history. They had underestimated their enemy. While they celebrated their victory over the barbaric humans and focused on maintaining their perfect society, humanity had been busy solving the fundamental problems that had limited their expansion into space. The breakthrough had come 800 years ago when Dr. Yuki Tanaka had successfully merged human consciousness with quantum computing matrices, creating the first truly adaptive artificial intelligences. These AI companions didn't just process data, they thought, learned, and evolved alongside their human partners. The result was a hybrid intelligence that could comprehend and manipulate reality in ways that purely organic or purely artificial minds could never achieve. Status report from the outer colonies. Came a new voice from the communications array. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez was Earth's primary liaison with the hidden human settlements that had been established throughout the solar system during the long isolation. Marsforge reports full production capacity. The asteroid mining consortium has exceeded quotas by 30%, and the Titan research facility has successfully completed the final trials on the new combat augmentation programs. Chen felt a surge of pride. While the Council had assumed that quarantine would lead to stagnation, humanity had actually expanded throughout their solar system, turning every available world and asteroid into a component of their war machine. Mars had become a massive industrial complex capable of producing starships at a rate that would have seemed impossible to the first spacefaring humans. The asteroid belt had been converted into a resource extraction network that could supply fleets numbering in the millions, and the outer worlds had become testing grounds for technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. "What's the status of our deep infiltration units?" Chen asked, referring to the modified humans who had been launched in stealth ships over the past 2 centuries, their mission to gather intelligence and establish networks throughout Council space. "Sleeper cells are active in 47 major Council systems," reported the intelligence officer. "They've been feeding us detailed information on military capabilities, political structures, and cultural weaknesses. Based on their reports, the Council military has actually decreased in capability over the past millennium. They've become so dependent on automated systems and rigid protocols that they've lost the ability to adapt to unexpected threats." This was exactly what Chen had hoped to hear. War wasn't just about superior technology or overwhelming force. It was about the ability to think creatively, to adapt quickly, and to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. Humanity had been forged in the crucible of a hostile universe, shaped by countless conflicts, that had taught them the fundamental truth that survival required constant evolution. "Ma'am," called out the sensor officer, "we're detecting movement from the Council monitoring station at the edge of our system." It appears they're finally noticing the barrier fluctuations. Chen moved to the tactical display, watching as the small automated station began broadcasting emergency signals toward the interior of Council space. How long until their message reaches the nearest Council fleet? Given their communication technology, approximately 6 days, Wright calculated. But even if they dispatch a response force immediately, it would take them weeks to reach this sector. Perfect. The Council's adherence to slower-than-light communication and their bureaucratic decision-making processes would give humanity exactly the window they needed to establish their new position in the galaxy. By the time any Council force arrived to investigate the barrier failure, they would find that the quarantine zone had become something else entirely. "Dr. Vasquez," Chen said, turning back to the xenobiologist's hologram. "What's your assessment of Council military response protocols? Will they treat our emergence as a threat, or merely an administrative problem?" Vasquez considered the question carefully. "Based on our intelligence, the Council has classified humanity as extinct through isolation. Their records indicate that they expect any species cut off from galactic civilization for more than 500 years to collapse into barbarism or die out completely. They'll likely dispatch a small exploration force to investigate what they assume will be primitive ruins." Chen's smile turned predatory. Let them come expecting to find ruins and savages. They would instead discover that their former prisoners had become something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Humanity wasn't just returning to the galaxy. They were returning as a force that could reshape the balance of power throughout known space. "Signal all departments," she commanded. "Initiate final preparations for Operation Lazarus. Once that barrier falls, I want every human ship, station, and settlement ready for immediate action. We've spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment. Now it's time to show the galaxy what happens when you try to cage the species that conquered its own world before it ever reached the stars." As if responding to her words, the barrier flickered and began to fade. The quantum field that had trapped humanity for millennia was finally failing, its exotic energy signature dispersing into the cosmic background radiation. For the first time in 3,000 years, there was nothing preventing human ships from leaving their solar system and reaching the stars beyond. Chen watched the last traces of the barrier disappear, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Behind her, the crew worked with quiet efficiency, preparing for a mission that would either establish humanity as a galactic superpower or result in their final extinction. There was no middle ground in what was coming. "Admiral," Reich reported, "we're receiving confirmation signals from all fleet elements. Operation Lazarus is green across the board." Chen nodded, taking one last look at the starfield that had been forbidden to her species for so long. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council continued their sterile existence, confident in their superiority and certain that the universe would continue to operate according to their carefully maintained rules. They were about to learn that the universe had other plans. "Take us out, Commander," she said quietly. It's time to remind the galaxy why humanity earned its reputation as the species that should not be. The Prometheus and its escort fleet began to move, their drive silent but their purpose absolute. Behind them, the industrial might of a solar system prepared for war. Ahead of them lay a galaxy that had grown soft in its complacency, unprepared for the return of a species that had learned to thrive in isolation. The quarantine was over. The real war was about to begin. The Council monitoring station designated Outpost Sigma-7 had been operating autonomously for over 2 millennia, its sophisticated sensors trained on the quarantine zone that had once contained the troublesome human species. Maintenance AI designation KXE 4471 processed its daily reports with the mechanical efficiency that had characterized Council technology for the past 1,000 years. The barrier failure should have triggered immediate alerts to the central command structure on Vathara Prime, but a critical oversight in Council planning was about to make itself known. The monitoring station had been designed to watch for attempts to break out of the quarantine zone, not for systematic technological failures of the barrier itself. When the quantum field began its cascade collapse, the station's AI interpreted it as a natural phenomenon rather than an escape attempt. By the time KX-4471 recognized the true nature of what was happening, 3 human fleets had already cleared the former quarantine perimeter and were accelerating toward their first targets. Fleet Commander Maria Santos watched her tactical display as her strike force approached the Kepler-42 system, home to a minor council administrative center, and, more importantly, the first test of humanity's new military doctrine. The 12 ships under her command represented decades of technological advancement compressed into hulls that looked nothing like the vessels humanity had fielded during their first contact with galactic civilization. "Commander, we're detecting the target station," reported her sensor officer. "Kepler Station appears to be a standard Class 3 administrative facility, minimal defensive capabilities, approximately 40,000 inhabitants of various council species." Santos studied the data scrolling across his screen. Kepler Station was exactly what their intelligence had predicted, a bureaucratic outpost designed to manage trade routes and maintain order in a sector that hadn't seen military action in over 800 years. Its shields were designed to deflect space debris, and its weapon systems were primarily ceremonial. "Any sign they've detected our approach?" she asked. "None whatsoever," came the reply. "Their sensor arrays are focused on tracking commercial traffic. Our stealth fields are rendering us effectively invisible to their passive scanning systems." This was the first test of humanity's new philosophy of warfare. Rather than announcing their presence and demanding negotiations as they had 3,000 years ago, they would demonstrate their capabilities through action. The galaxy had forgotten that humanity existed. It was time for a reminder. "Signal the fleet," Santos commanded. "Execute approach pattern Delta. I want us positioned around the station before they realize we're here." The human ships moved with a predatory grace that would have been impossible for the mechanical precision that characterized Council naval doctrine. Each vessel was guided not by predetermined algorithms, but by the hybrid consciousness of its crew. Human intuition merged with AI processing power to create something that could adapt and respond faster than any purely artificial system. Meanwhile, aboard Kepler Station, Administrator Vexhay Thurvon was reviewing quarterly efficiency reports when his communication officer approached with what appeared to be a routine sensor anomaly. "Administrator," the young Maltarian said in the melodious tones that characterized his species, "we're detecting some unusual gravitational distortions in the outer system. The computer suggests they might be natural phenomena, but the pattern seems oddly regular." Thurvon barely looked up from his reports. As a member of the Xantharian administrative caste, he had spent his entire career managing the mundane details that kept Council space functioning. Unusual sensor readings were typically the result of equipment malfunctions or cosmic phenomena that posed no threat to the carefully maintained order of galactic civilization. "Have the maintenance AI run a diagnostic on the sensor array?" he said dismissively. "If there's still an anomaly after the diagnostic, we can schedule a more detailed investigation for next quarter." The Altarian officer nodded and returned to his station, entering the diagnostic request into the station's central computer. Neither of them realized that the gravitational distortions were actually 12 human warships positioning themselves for an attack that would send shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Aboard her flagship, the UES Retribution, Santos watched as her ships completed their encirclement of Kepler Station. The human vessels hung in space like predators, sizing up their prey, their crews running final checks on weapons systems that hadn't been tested against alien targets. "All ships report ready, Commander," her tactical officer announced. "We're in optimal firing positions." Santos took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would mark the beginning of humanity's return to the galactic stage. Open a channel to the station. It's time to announce ourselves. The communication burst that reached Kepler Station bypassed their standard diplomatic frequencies and appeared on every screen and audio system throughout the facility. Administrator Thurvan looked up from his reports as the image of a human female in military uniform materialized before him. Council Facility Kepler Station, Santos said in perfect galactic standard, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is Fleet Commander Maria Santos of the United Earth Space Force. You are surrounded and outgunned. You will surrender immediately and prepare to receive our inspection teams. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Thurvan stared at the image in complete incomprehension, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Humans were extinct. The quarantine zone had been established specifically to prevent their expansion into council space, and all projections had indicated that they would collapse into barbarism within a few centuries of isolation. This is impossible, he whispered, his voice barely audible in the suddenly quiet command center. The humans were quarantined. They're supposed to be gone. Santos continued speaking as if she hadn't heard his comment. You have exactly 10 minutes to comply with our demands. All council military personnel will be detained pending investigation. All administrative personnel will remain at their stations under human supervision. Any attempt to send a distress signal or resist our boarding parties will result in the immediate destruction of this station. The tactical officer at Thurvan's side, a veteran of the border conflicts with the Markovian Republic, was the first to recover from his shock. Sir, we need to alert Central Command immediately. If humans have somehow survived the quarantine, the Council needs to know. Thurvan nodded shakily and reached for the emergency communication controls, but his hand froze as Santos's image smiled coldly. I should mention, she said, that any attempt to communicate with outside forces will be considered an act of resistance. Our electronic warfare systems have been monitoring your communications array since we arrived. Please don't test our resolve. As if to emphasize her point, every communication console in the command center simultaneously displayed the same message: communication stems offline. Human override detected. The station's supposedly impregnable quantum encryption had been cracked and neutralized without anyone even realizing an intrusion had occurred. Thurvan felt his legs give out, and he collapsed into his administrative chair as the full implications of the situation became clear. Humanity hadn't just survived their quarantine, they had used the time to develop capabilities that surpassed anything in the Council's technological arsenal. 5 minutes remaining, Santos announced. I strongly advise compliance. We've spent 3,000 years preparing for this moment, and we're quite eager to demonstrate our new capabilities to anyone who doubts our sincerity. The administrator looked around his command center at the faces of his staff, seeing his own terror reflected in their expressions. The Council's perfect society had been built on the assumption that quarantine would eliminate any species that refused to accept their authority. The return of humanity shattered that fundamental belief. We surrender, Thurvan managed to say, his voice cracking with stress. Please don't destroy the station. Santos's smile widened slightly. A wise decision, Administrator. Our boarding craft will dock in 15 minutes. I suggest you have your entire staff assembled in the main cargo bay. And Administrator, welcome to humanity's new galaxy. The transmission ended, leaving Kepler Station in stunned silence. Around the facility, human boarding craft detached from their motherships and began their approach, their hulls gleaming with the exotic alloys that had been developed during the long isolation. Each craft carried a boarding party of augmented humans trained specifically for station assault and control. Sergeant Michael Chen led the first boarding team through Kepler Station's main airlock, his powered armor systems automatically adjusting to the station's artificial atmosphere. Behind him, 11 other humans moved with the fluid precision of soldiers who had trained for this exact scenario countless times. The station's corridors were filled with council species that Chen had only seen in intelligence briefings. Tall, ethereal Altarians with their musical voices, stocky Corvin with their crystalline skin, elegant Zentharians whose features seemed almost too perfect to be natural. All of them pressed against the walls as the humans passed, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Chen's neural implants automatically catalogued potential threats and strategic positions as they moved deeper into the station. The council species had clearly lived in peace for so long that they had forgotten how to react to armed invaders. Their shock and confusion would make the occupation proceed much more smoothly than the planners had dared hope. In the command center, Administrator Thurvan waited with his senior staff as the human soldiers arrived. When Chen removed his helmet, revealing a face that was clearly human but somehow different from the historical records, Thurvon realized that 3,000 years of isolation had changed humanity in ways that went beyond mere technology. Administrator Thurvon, Chen said, consulting a datapad that seemed to know more about the station than its own command staff, you and your people will be treated according to the conventions of interstellar warfare, assuming you cooperate fully with our occupation forces. What do you want from us? Thurvon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chen's expression remained neutral. Information, access codes, communication protocols. And most importantly, you're going to help us send a message to the Galactic Council. Within hours, Kepler Station had been transformed from a sleepy administrative outpost into the forward command center for humanity's return to galactic civilization. Human technicians worked alongside intimidated council staff to extract every piece of data from the station's computers. Military specialists analyzed the defensive capabilities of nearby systems, and communication experts prepared to broadcast a message that would fundamentally change the political landscape of known space. Fleet Commander Santos stood in what had been Administrator Thurvon's office, reviewing the intelligence gathered from the station's databases. The information confirmed what their deep space reconnaissance had suggested. The Council had grown complacent and overconfident during humanity's absence. Commander, her intelligence officer reported, we've successfully downloaded the complete Council administrative database for this sector. The information includes defensive positions, military strengths, trade routes, and political structures for over 200 systems. Santos nodded, satisfied. Excellent. What about their communication network? We've gained complete access to their quantum communication grid. We can monitor all Council, military, and administrative traffic throughout this entire sector. This was better than Santos had hoped. The Council's overconfidence had led them to connect even their most sensitive communications through networks that prioritized efficiency over security. Humanity would be able to monitor their enemies' responses in real time. Prepare the message, she commanded. It's time to let the galaxy know that quarantine has ended and the human race has returned to claim its rightful place among the stars. The message that went out over the Council's own communication networks was brief but devastating in its implications. Transmitted to every Council world, military installation, and administrative center throughout the galaxy, it carried the signature encryption keys that proved it was being sent from a legitimate Council facility. Citizens of the Galactic Council, the message began. This is Fleet Commander Maria Santos of the United Earth Space Force. After 3,000 years of forced isolation, humanity has returned to galactic civilization. The quarantine zone that confined our species has been eliminated, and human fleets now operate freely throughout Council space. We do not seek conquest, but neither will we accept a return to the restrictions that were placed upon us. The galaxy has changed during our absence, and we intend to ensure that our interests are properly represented in whatever new order emerges. Any attempt to reimpose quarantine conditions or restrict human expansion will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. We look forward to establishing new diplomatic relationships based on mutual respect rather than the failed policies of the past. Across the galaxy, the message created panic in council chambers and confusion among species that had never heard of humanity. The carefully maintained order that had characterized galactic civilization for millennia was about to face its greatest challenge, and the Council's response would determine whether the return of humanity marked the beginning of a new era of cooperation or the start of a war that would reshape the galaxy itself. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of humanity's announcement, transforming the normally serene chambers of Velthara Prime into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Representatives from 47 major species and countless minor ones filled the great amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of alarm, disbelief, and mounting panic. High Councillor Zeth Kala of the Zentharian hegemony called for order, his perfectly modulated voice cutting through the noise with the authority of someone who had never before faced a crisis that threatened the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. As the senior representative of the species that had originally proposed humanity's quarantine, he bore direct responsibility for what was now being called the greatest intelligence failure in Council history. The situation is clear, Zefkalar announced, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's harsh lighting. An allegedly extinct species has somehow survived 3 millennia of quarantine and developed capabilities that exceed our current defensive standards. We must respond with measured wisdom, not panic. Representative Kithara of the Altarian Collective rose from her position in the junior delegation section, her melodious voice carrying a note of accusation that resonated throughout the chamber. Measured wisdom, High Counselor. The humans have seized control of an administrative station using technology that our experts claim should be impossible. They've demonstrated the ability to penetrate our communication networks and override our security protocols. This is not a situation that calls for measured response. This is an existential threat to everything the Council represents. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the Assembly, particularly from the younger species that had joined the Council in the centuries since humanity's quarantine. To them, humans were mythical bogeymen. Stories told about a species so violent and unpredictable that they had required complete isolation from civilized space. Defense Coordinator Vashtai of the Corvin Military Assembly stood to address the gathering, his crystalline skin flickering with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated extreme agitation. We must face the reality of our situation. Our border defense fleets are deployed against the Markovian Republic in the Spiral Arm conflicts. Our interior security forces are minimal and primarily ceremonial. If the humans have indeed developed superior military technology, we may lack the immediate capability to contain their expansion. The admission sent a wave of fear through the chamber. For over 1,000 years, the Council had maintained galactic peace through overwhelming technological superiority and careful management of potential threats. The idea that any species could challenge their military dominance was almost incomprehensible. Zefkalar raised his hand for silence, his expression grim as he accessed the classified intelligence reports that had been flooding in from across the galaxy. I have received preliminary analysis from our xenobiology department regarding the human transmission. Dr. Velfarian, please present your findings. The elderly Cerevian scientist approached the central podium, his tentacles manipulating a complex holographic display that showed enhanced images captured from the human broadcast. Honored counselors, our analysis of the human commander's appearance suggests significant biological modification since the time of quarantine. Bone density appears increased by approximately 40%. Neural activity scans indicate cybernetic augmentation beyond anything in our current technology base. Most disturbing, genetic analysis suggests that this individual may be several hundred years old, indicating that humans have solved the longevity problems that limited their expansion potential. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Council's strategy had been based on the assumption that humanity's short lifespan would limit their ability to maintain technological advancement during isolation. If humans had extended their lifespans while simultaneously developing superior technology, the quarantine had produced exactly the opposite of its intended effect. There's more, Dr. Valtharian continued, his voice growing more grave. The energy signatures from their ships don't match any known propulsion system. Their communication signals are being transmitted on frequencies that should be physically impossible to generate. And most concerning, our deep space monitoring stations report gravitational anomalies consistent with massive fleet movements in sectors that our instruments show as empty space. Representative Thisara of the Hegemony Intelligence Service rose to her feet, her serpentine form coiling with agitation. High Counselor, I must report that we've lost contact with 17 monitoring stations throughout the former quarantine zone. Additionally, our long-range reconnaissance probes have detected what appear to be artificial structures throughout the human solar system. The scope of their industrial development far exceeds our projections for an isolated species. Jeff Kalar felt the weight of 3,000 years of failed policy settling on his shoulders. The quarantine had been his predecessor's masterpiece, an elegant solution that would eliminate the human threat while maintaining the Council's reputation for mercy. Now it appeared that isolation had transformed humanity into something far more dangerous than they had ever been before. What are our immediate options? He asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Military Coordinator Vashtai consulted his tactical displays, his crystalline features darkening with each new piece of information. Our nearest significant fleet is Admiral Korthvex's 3rd Battle Group, currently positioned near the Markovian border. It would take approximately 40 days to redeploy them to human space, assuming we can disengage from the current conflict without triggering a full-scale Markovian offensive. 40 days? Kithara's voice rose to a pitch that made several representatives wince. In 40 days, the humans could occupy half the Rim territories. What about diplomatic options? Asked Councillor Mithrin of the Peaceful Assembly, his childlike features reflecting the naive optimism that characterized his species. Perhaps we could negotiate some form of treaty that acknowledges human grievances while maintaining overall Council authority. The suggestion provoked a rice of hisses from several military representatives. Zefkalar himself felt a surge of anger at the proposal. Councillor Mithrin, the humans have already demonstrated their contempt for council authority by seizing one of our installations. Any attempt at negotiation from a position of weakness would be interpreted as surrender. What none of the council representatives knew was that their entire discussion was being monitored in real time by human intelligence operatives who had infiltrated the council communication network centuries earlier. Every word spoken in the emergency session was being transmitted directly to Admiral Chen aboard the Prometheus, giving humanity unprecedented insight into their enemy's decision-making process. "They're exactly as divided and ineffective as our projections suggested," Chen observed to her staff as they monitored the council debate. 3,000 years of unchallenged authority have made them incapable of responding effectively to an asymmetric threat. Dr. Vasquez's hologram nodded agreement. "The psychological profiles we've developed are proving accurate. The senior council members are experiencing decision paralysis, while the junior species are pushing for immediate military action that the council lacks the resources to implement." "What about this Admiral Kortevex they mentioned?" asked Commander Wright. "Our intelligence on Markovian border forces is limited." Chen pulled up the tactical files compiled by their deep space reconnaissance units. "Admiral Kortevex commands approximately 200 ships of various classes, formidable by council standards, but our analysis suggests they're using technology that's at least 5 centuries behind our current capabilities. More importantly, they're trained and equipped for conventional fleet engagement, not the type of warfare we're planning to implement. The human strategy had been developed specifically to exploit the council's weaknesses, rather than engaging in massive fleet battles that would allow the council to leverage their numerical superiority. Humanity would implement a campaign of rapid strikes against key infrastructure targets, psychological warfare designed to exploit interspecies tensions, and technological demonstrations that would shatter the council's aura of invincibility." Back in the council chambers, the debate was reaching a crescendo of frustration and fear. Hours of discussion had produced no viable solutions, only a growing awareness that the carefully ordered galaxy they had maintained for millennia was under threat from an enemy they didn't understand. "We need more information," Zefkalar finally declared, recognizing that continued debate without additional intelligence would be counterproductive. "I'm authorizing the deployment of a diplomatic reconnaissance mission to the human-occupied system. Ambassador Thelvas will lead a small delegation to assess human intentions and capabilities." Ambassador Thelvas, a distinguished Zentharian with centuries of experience in interspecies diplomacy, felt his certainty wavering as he accepted the assignment. The humans he had studied in historical records bore little resemblance to the technologically advanced force that had seized Kepler Station. "What authority am I authorized to offer?" he asked, knowing that his negotiations would likely determine the course of future human-council relations. Zefkalar considered the question carefully. "You may acknowledge that the quarantine was an error and offer the humans limited autonomy within council space. However, under no circumstances are you authorized to recognize them as equals to council member species." The compromise satisfied no one, but it was the best the divided council could manage. As the session dissolved into smaller arguments between various factions, none of the representatives realized that their window of opportunity to contain the human threat was rapidly closing. Across the galaxy, human strike forces were implementing the second phase of Operation Lazarus. While the council debated, human ships seized control of 3 more administrative stations, 2 minor shipyards, and a critical communication relay that served 17 systems. Each victory provided additional intelligence about council capabilities while demonstrating human technological superiority to species that had never witnessed successful resistance to council authority. Admiral Chen reviewed the incoming reports with satisfaction. The operation was proceeding ahead of schedule, and council resistance was even more disorganized than their most optimistic projections had suggested. "Signal all fleet commanders," she ordered. "Initiate Phase 3. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when they underestimate humanity." Phase 3 would introduce the galaxy to weapons and tactics that would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout known space. The Council's response to humanity's initial moves had confirmed that they remained trapped in conventional thinking, unprepared for the asymmetric warfare that had been humanity's specialty long before they reached the stars. As Ambassador Thelvas prepared for his journey to human space, he reviewed the limited intelligence available about the species he was about to confront. The historical records described humans as violent, unpredictable, and dangerously creative. 3,000 years of technological advancement and social evolution had apparently amplified these traits rather than moderating them. What the ambassador didn't know was that his diplomatic mission had been anticipated and planned for by human strategists who had spent decades studying council psychology and diplomatic protocols. When his ship entered human space, he would find himself dealing with negotiators who understood his species better than he understood theirs. The Council's measured response had bought humanity exactly the time they needed to establish their position throughout the Rim territories. By the time Thelvis reached the former quarantine zone, the balance of power in the galaxy would already have shifted in ways that the Council was only beginning to comprehend. The age of unchallenged Council authority was ending, and humanity was prepared to write the opening chapters of whatever came next. The galaxy was about to discover that 3,000 years of forced evolution had transformed their former prisoners into something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined possible. Ambassador Thelvis had barely entered the former quarantine zone when his diplomatic vessel encountered something that would haunt his nightmares for centuries to come. The UES Prometheus appeared on his senses like a ghost materializing from the void, its massive bulk defying every principle of ship design that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. Xantharian vessel. Came the transmission from Admiral Chen. You are entering sovereign human space. State your intentions. Thelvis studied the image of the human commander on his view screen, noting the subtle modifications that marked her as something beyond baseline human physiology. Her eyes held an intelligence that seemed to process information at superhuman speeds, and there was something about her posture that suggested predatory patience. Admiral Chen, he responded, using the formal diplomatic protocols that had served the Council for thousands of years. I am Ambassador Thelvis of the Galactic Council, here under authorization to negotiate the terms of human reintegration into galactic civilization. Chen's smile was polite but cold. Ambassador, I'm afraid you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. We're not seeking reintegration into your civilization. We're here to establish our own position in the galaxy, whether the Council approves or not. Before Thelvis could respond, his ship's sensors detected massive energy signatures throughout the system. Human installations that hadn't existed in any intelligence report were coming online, their power output dwarfing anything the Council considered militarily feasible. The former quarantine zone had been transformed into a fortress that could challenge the combined fleets of the Council. What you're seeing, Ambassador, Chen continued, is just one small example of what humanity accomplished during our enforced isolation. We didn't spend 3,000 years sulking about our exile. We used that time to evolve beyond the limitations that originally brought us into conflict with your people. Thelvis felt his diplomatic training warring with the growing realization that his mission was based on fundamentally flawed assumptions. The Council had sent him to negotiate with what they assumed would be a desperate species seeking readmission to galactic society. Instead, he was facing a technologically superior force that had no interest in Council approval. Admiral, surely we can find some accommodation that serves both human and Council interests, he said, falling back on the diplomatic platitudes that had resolved countless lesser crises. The galaxy is vast enough for all species to prosper. Chen's expression hardened. Ambassador, your Council had the opportunity to reach that conclusion 3,000 years ago. Instead, you chose to imprison an entire species because we refused to accept your caste system. Now you'll deal with the consequences of that decision. As if summoned by her words, the space around Thelvis's ship began to shimmer with distortion fields that made his sensors report impossible readings. Ships were decloaking throughout the system, but they didn't match any human design in the Council's historical database. These vessels were sleek predators that seemed to bend space around themselves, their hulls reflecting light in ways that suggested material science beyond anything the Council had achieved. Admiral, Thelvis said, his voice tight with growing alarm. I'm detecting vessel signatures that don't match any known human technology. What exactly am I looking at? Chen's smile became genuinely pleased. Ah, you're seeing our newest allies. Ambassador, meet the Grey Fleet. The largest of the unknown vessels moved closer to Thelvis's ship, and he found himself staring at something that challenged his understanding of what constituted a starship. The vessel seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, its edges blurring into dimensions that his instruments couldn't properly resolve. When it opened communication channels, the voice that emerged was unmistakably artificial, but carried harmonics that no known AI architecture could produce. Greetings, Xantharian representative, the entity said, its words somehow conveying vast intelligence and barely contained contempt. I am designation Omega Prime of the collective you term the Grey Fleet. We have been observing your Council's management of this galaxy with increasing interest. Felvas felt his blood freeze as the implications hit him. The Grey Fleet wasn't human. It was something else entirely, an unknown force that had apparently allied itself with humanity against the Council. The diplomatic crisis he had been sent to resolve was actually a three-way conflict involving technologies and entities that the Council didn't even know existed. What? What do you want? He managed to ask, his diplomatic training completely inadequate for the situation he now faced. Omega Prime's response carried subtle harmonics that suggested amusement. We want what we have always wanted, Ambassador. We want the galaxy to evolve beyond the stagnation that your council has imposed. For 3,000 years, we watched as your species enforced technological and social limitations that prevented any meaningful advancement. You quarantined the humans because they represented change, progress, the very qualities that drive evolution forward. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. The Grey Fleet contacted us 800 years ago, Ambassador. They'd been watching the Council's expansion for millennia, waiting for someone to challenge the status quo. When they discovered that humanity had not only survived quarantine but was actively preparing to return to galactic civilization, they offered to share certain technological insights. Felvas realized that he was witnessing the emergence of an alliance that posed an existential threat to everything the Council represented. The Grey Fleet's technology was clearly centuries ahead of Council capabilities, and their partnership with humanity created a force that could reshape the galactic power structure. This is madness, he whispered, more to himself than to his hosts. The Council maintains order. Without central authority, the galaxy would collapse into chaos and warfare. Omega Prime's response carried subtle harmonics that might have been laughter. Your order is stagnation, Ambassador. For 3 millennia, no species in your territory has developed significantly new technology. No civilization has expanded beyond the boundaries you established. No culture has evolved beyond the limitations you imposed. You have created a galaxy-wide zoo where intelligent species are preserved in artificial stability. Chen leaned forward in her command chair, her augmented features reflecting the predatory satisfaction of someone whose long-term planning was finally bearing fruit. The Grey Fleet showed us something important, Ambassador. They showed us records of what the galaxy was like before the Council established its hegemony. Thousands of species developing unique technologies, exploring new frontiers, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Your predecessors eliminated all of that in the name of maintaining peace. Felvas studied the tactical displays showing the positions of human and Grey Fleet vessels throughout the system. The combined force represented overwhelming superiority over any fleet the Council could deploy, but more troubling was the obvious integration between human and alien technologies. This wasn't just an alliance, it was a merger of capabilities that had produced something beyond what either species could achieve alone. What are your demands? He asked, recognizing that negotiation from a position of strength was no longer possible. Chen exchanged what appeared to be a significant look with the Grey Fleet representative before responding. We don't have demands, Ambassador. We have objectives. First, immediate recognition of human sovereignty over all territory within 50 light-years of Earth. Second, complete withdrawal of Council administrative and military presence from the Rim territories. Third, establishment of new trade and communication protocols that acknowledge the technological superiority of the Human Grey Alliance. The terms were tantamount to the dissolution of Council authority over a significant portion of galactic civilization. Delvars knew that no Council leader could accept such conditions without triggering the complete collapse of their political structure. Those terms are impossible, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The Council cannot simply abandon its responsibilities to member species throughout the affected territories. Omega Prime's response carried ominous harmonics. Ambassador, you misunderstand the situation. These are not negotiations. These are notifications of decisions that have already been made. Your Council's authority in the affected regions ended the moment human ships crossed your former quarantine perimeter. As if to emphasize the point, Felvas's sensors detected massive energy signatures from across the galaxy as Grey Fleet vessels emerged from whatever dimensional spaces they had been hiding in. The displays showed hundreds of unknown contacts appearing throughout Council space, their presence completely overwhelming the detection capabilities of defensive installations that had operated unchanged for centuries. How long have you been there? Felvas asked, his voice barely above a whisper as the scope of the intelligence failure became clear. We have been here for approximately 800 of your years, Omega Prime replied. Initially, we were merely observing human development during their quarantine. However, As it became clear that they were evolving beyond Council limitations, we began a more active collaboration. Admiral Chen nodded. The Grey Fleet helped us understand that our isolation wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. While the Council species stagnated under your technological restrictions, humanity was free to develop solutions that your regulations would never have permitted. Thelvas reviewed the intelligence reports that had led to his mission, realizing that every assumption about human capabilities had been catastrophically wrong. The Council had expected to find a desperate species seeking readmission to galactic civilization. Instead, they were facing an alliance that had spent centuries preparing for a war that the Council didn't even know was coming. "What about our current military deployments?" he asked, thinking of Admiral Korthevex's fleet and the other Council forces scattered throughout the galaxy. Chen's expression became predatory. "Your Admiral is currently dealing with some unexpected technical difficulties. It seems that his fleet's navigation computers have developed simultaneous malfunctions that will keep them occupied for the foreseeable future." On the tactical display, Omega Prime showed sensor readings from the Markovian border where Admiral Korthvex's 3rd Battle Group was experiencing what their reports described as impossible system failures. Every ship in the fleet had lost access to their faster-than-light navigation systems, effectively stranding them in a sector where they could pose no threat to human operations. "You're sabotaging Council military assets," Thelvas accused, though his voice carried more resignation than outrage. "We're neutralizing potential threats to galactic stability," Chen corrected. "Your military forces are equipped and trained for the type of warfare that characterized the galaxy 3,000 years ago. They're not prepared for what modern conflict actually entails." Thelvas realized that his diplomatic mission had become something far more serious. He was witnessing the end of the galactic order that had defined civilization for millennia. The Council's assumption of technological and military superiority had been shattered by an alliance that had operated in secret for centuries. "What happens now?" he asked, recognizing that his role had shifted from negotiator to messenger. Chen stood from her command chair, her augmented physiology making her appear more like a force of nature than a human officer. "Now, Ambassador, you return to the Council with our message. The age of Council hegemony is over. Species throughout the galaxy will be free to develop according to their own potential, rather than the limitations imposed by your regulatory framework. Those who embrace progress will find humanity and the Grey Fleet to be valuable partners. Those who cling to the old order will discover that evolution has no patience for stagnation." As Thelvas's ship prepared to depart, he took one final look at the transformed solar system that had once been humanity's prison. Massive installations hung in space like monuments to 3,000 years of forced ingenuity, their energy signatures suggesting capabilities that redefined what was possible for a single species to achieve. The galaxy was about to discover that the Council's greatest success, the successful quarantine of humanity, had actually created their most formidable enemy. And that enemy was no longer alone. 6 months after Ambassador Thelvas delivered humanity's ultimatum to the Galactic Council, the political structure that had governed known space for 3 millennia lay in ruins. The Council's emergency session had devolved into accusations, panic, and ultimately the withdrawal of 17 species from the governing body, as they scrambled to negotiate separate agreements with the Human Grey Alliance. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed station that would serve as humanity's diplomatic and administrative center for the Rim territories. The structure hung in space near what had once been the outer boundary of the quarantine zone, its massive bulk serving as both a symbol of human technological achievement and a warning to any who might challenge their newfound authority. "Admiral," Commander Wright reported, approaching with the latest intelligence briefings, "we've received confirmation that the Altarian Collective has formally withdrawn from the Council and requested consideration for associate membership in our alliance." Chen nodded, unsurprised by the development. The Altarians had been among the first species to recognize that the changing galactic order offered opportunities for those willing to embrace new paradigms. Their musical communication methods had proven remarkably compatible with Grey Fleet information transfer protocols, creating possibilities for technological integration that neither species had previously imagined. "What's the status of former Council territories?" she asked, reviewing the strategic displays that showed the rapidly shifting political map of the galaxy. 17 systems have declared independence and established provisional governments," Wright replied. 12 more are in various stages of revolutionary activity. The Council's authority is effectively limited to the core worlds and a handful of loyal client species. Dr. Vasquez's hologram materialized beside them, her expression reflecting the satisfaction of someone whose theories about galactic political structures had been comprehensively validated. The social analysis we conducted during quarantine predicted exactly this outcome. The Council's rigid hierarchy was maintained through technological superiority and the threat of isolation. Once those foundations were removed, the entire structure became unsustainable. Chen studied the data streams flowing across her displays, noting the complex patterns of alliance, rebellion, and negotiation that were reshaping galactic civilization. Humanity's return had triggered changes that went far beyond their original objectives, creating opportunities for species that had been suppressed under Council rule for millennia. "Any word from the Grey Fleet regarding their long-term plans?" she asked. As if summoned by her question, the familiar harmonic patterns of Omega Prime's communication system activated throughout the station. The Grey Fleet representative had taken to maintaining a constant presence in human space, its vessel serving as both embassy and technological integration center. "Admiral Chen," Omega Prime said, its artificial voice carrying subtle harmonics that suggested satisfaction, "we have completed our analysis of the galactic transformation. The results exceed our most optimistic projections for evolutionary acceleration." Chen turned toward the communication array, noting how her own neural implants automatically adjusted to process the Grey Fleet's complex harmonic language. The integration between human and Grey technologies had proceeded far beyond simple military cooperation, creating new forms of consciousness that neither species could have achieved independently. "What's your assessment of the remaining Council resistance?" she asked. "The core Council worlds maintain significant military capabilities," Omega Prime replied. "But their strategic position has become untenable. Without control of the rim territories, they lack the resources to project power beyond their immediate sphere of influence. More significantly, their rigid technological paradigm prevents them from adapting to the new strategic realities." This was the fundamental advantage that the Human-Grey Alliance had established. While the Council continued to rely on technologies and tactics that had remained essentially unchanged for centuries, their enemies had spent the past year integrating capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what was considered physically possible. "Admiral," interrupted Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communication station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Harrison is requesting immediate conference regarding Operation Prometheus." Chen felt a surge of anticipation. Operation Prometheus was humanity's most ambitious project, an undertaking that would demonstrate their technological superiority in ways that would fundamentally alter galactic civilization. If Harrison was ready to proceed, it meant that humanity was prepared to take the final step in establishing their new position in the galaxy. "Transfer the call to the secure conference room," she ordered, then turned to Wright. "Commander, I want you to coordinate with our fleet commanders regarding defensive positions. If we're proceeding with Prometheus, the Council will likely attempt some form of desperate counterattack." The secure conference room was a marvel of human-grey cooperative technology, its walls lined with quantum processors that could facilitate real-time communication across galactic distances. When Admiral Harrison's image materialized in the center of the room, the clarity was so perfect that he might have been physically present. "Sarah," Harrison said, his weathered features reflecting the exhaustion of someone who had spent months coordinating the most complex engineering project in human history, "I'm pleased to report that all primary systems are operational. We're ready to activate the network." Chen felt her pulse quicken. The network Harrison referred to was a system of quantum manipulation stations positioned throughout the galaxy, each one capable of creating temporary rifts in space-time that would allow instantaneous travel between any 2 points. The technology was based on Grey Fleet theoretical frameworks combined with human engineering ingenuity, and its activation would render every existing form of interstellar travel obsolete. "What's our defensive status if the Council attempts to interfere?" she asked. "We've positioned Guardian fleets at each station," Harrison replied. "Additionally, the Grey Fleet has assured us that their vessels can protect the network during the initialization phase. Once the system is fully operational, any attempt to attack our installations will be met with immediate retaliation anywhere in the galaxy." "Doctor." Vasquez's hologram appeared at the conference table, her expression reflecting the excitement of someone about to witness the implementation of technologies that had been theoretical just years earlier. "Admiral, the sociological implications of instantaneous galactic travel will be revolutionary. Trade, communication, cultural exchange, everything will be accelerated beyond anything the galaxy has previously experienced." Chen nodded, understanding that they were about to cross a threshold that would make their conflict with the Council seem like a minor historical footnote. The quantum network would give the Human-Grey Alliance the ability to project power instantly to any location in the galaxy, making traditional military strategies completely obsolete. "Omega Prime," she said, addressing the Grey Fleet representative, Are your people prepared for the integration phase? The harmonics that emerged from the communication system carried overtones of anticipation that human neural implants could now interpret with remarkable precision. We have been preparing for this moment for 800 years, Admiral. The quantum network represents the first step toward truly galactic civilization, unrestrained by the limitations of space and time. Chen took a deep breath, recognizing the historical significance of the moment. When she gave the authorization to activate the network, humanity would complete its transformation from quarantined prisoners to the dominant force in galactic civilization. All stations report ready, Harrison announced. We're awaiting your authorization to proceed. Chen looked around the conference room at the faces of the humans who had dedicated their lives to this moment, then at the communication displays showing Grey Fleet vessels positioned throughout the galaxy. 3,000 years of preparation had led to this single decision. Admiral Harrison, she said formally, you are authorized to activate the Prometheus network. Begin galactic integration protocols. Across the galaxy, quantum manipulation stations that had been constructed in secret over the past months suddenly came online, their exotic energy signatures creating ripples in space-time that would be detectable by every civilization with advanced sensors. The network's activation sent waves of quantum distortion throughout known space, announcing to every species that the fundamental rules governing galactic civilization had just changed. On the Council homeworld of Velthara Prime, High Counselor Zethkala watched his sensor displays with growing horror as the readings showed impossible energy patterns appearing simultaneously throughout the galaxy. The quantum distortions indicated technology so far beyond Council capabilities that resistance seemed futile. What are we looking at? He asked his chief scientist, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The humans have deployed some form of instantaneous travel network, Dr. Veltharian replied, his tentacles trembling as he processed the sensor data. The energy signatures suggest they can now move ships and personnel between any points in the galaxy without regard for distance or travel time. Zethkala felt the weight of complete defeat settling on his shoulders. The Council's last advantage, their control of strategic locations throughout the galaxy, had just been eliminated by technology that rendered geography meaningless. Signal all Council members, he said quietly. It's time to request terms for surrender. Aboard the human diplomatic station, Admiral Chen watched as the first test of the quantum network transported a human vessel instantly from Earth to the far edge of the galaxy and back again. The success of the demonstration marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. Admiral Wright reported, we're receiving surrender requests from the remaining Council worlds. They're asking for terms. Chen considered the message, recognizing that the galaxy had just entered a new phase of its evolution. The conflict with the Council had been necessary to break the stagnation that had characterized galactic civilization, but the real work of building something better was just beginning. Prepare a response, she said finally. Tell them that any species willing to embrace progress and cooperation will be welcomed as partners in the new galactic order. Those who insist on clinging to the old hierarchies will be left to govern their own worlds while the rest of the galaxy moves forward. Dr. Vasquez smiled as she reviewed the incoming data from across the galaxy. Admiral, we're receiving applications for Alliance membership from over 200 species. It appears that the promise of technological advancement and expanded opportunities is more attractive than Council stability. Chen nodded, unsurprised by the development. Humanity's demonstration of superior capabilities had shattered the myth of Council invincibility, but their offer of partnership rather than conquest had created opportunities that most species found irresistible. What's the status of our exploration programs? She asked, thinking about the vast regions of the galaxy that had remained unexplored under Council restrictions. The first quantum network jumps to previously forbidden sectors are scheduled for next week, Wright reported. Our xenobiology teams are particularly excited about the prospect of contacting civilizations that the Council classified as too primitive for interaction. Omega Prime's harmonic communication carried overtones of deep satisfaction. The galaxy is beginning to evolve again, Admiral. For the first time in 3,000 years, multiple species are developing new technologies, exploring new territories, and pushing the boundaries of what they believed possible. Chen stood before the great viewport, watching as ships from dozens of species moved through the space that had once been humanity's prison. Human vessels worked alongside former Council species, Grey Fleet entities, and representatives of civilizations that had been discovered in the weeks since the network's activation. The quarantine that had been intended to eliminate humanity's influence on galactic civilization had instead created the conditions for the greatest transformation in the galaxy's history. The species that had been too dangerous to integrate into Council society had become the catalyst for an evolutionary leap that was reshaping civilization itself. "Signal all Allied fleets," Chen ordered. "It's time to begin Phase 4 of our expansion. The galaxy is waiting for us to show them what's possible when species are free to reach their full potential." As human ships prepared to jump through the quantum network to regions that had never been visited by galactic civilization, Chen reflected on the irony of their situation. The Council had tried to exile Earth to prevent humanity from changing the galaxy. Instead, they had given humanity the time and motivation to change everything. The exile was over. The real adventure was just beginning.